Welcome, everyone. I am here with an awesome guest, the one and only Joe Baguley. Joe, how are you? I hope all is well.
Yeah, all good. All good. Having a great day.
Great. So could you please introduce yourself and explain what your role is at VMware/Broadcom?
Yeah, no worries.
How should I call it, by the way?
What? How to call what?
VMware/Broadcom, Broadcom,
Broadcom.
VMware?
Just Broadcom. It's very
Broadcom.
simple. So
Right.
it's actually, that's a fairly simple one. The company's Broadcom. The products are VMware. So we have VMware, Cloud Foundation. The products are Broadcom. I work for Broadcom. I'm a Broadcom employee. You might hear people talk about VMware by Broadcom, and that's more sort of a brand around the products themselves. So there you go.
Right. And what's your role at Broadcom?
Yeah, so let's talk about that one simply. So Chief Technology Officer. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for EMEA, so Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And at Broadcom, I came obviously from VMware. A lot of people out there who watch this probably know that. I've been at VMware since 2011 and obviously came over as part of the acquisition. And now I cover a lot more than just VMware in what I'm Chief Technology Officer for. So the conversations have got bigger and better.
Right. So one of those conversations is what we're going to have today. And let's start simple. For those who have been living under a rock or who haven't kept up, last week we announced VCF 9, also known as VMware Cloud Foundation 9. So could you explain its core value to someone outside of IT?
Yeah, really simple. It's a private cloud platform. Full stop, right? So you've got public cloud, you've got private cloud. In essence, if you want all the cool stuff that you do in public cloud, but you want to be able to do it on premises, not or in a colo or whatever, not in public cloud, let's put it that way. That's what VCF 9 does for you. It provides everything you need to do to run up a private cloud that does everything that a public cloud does and more. Probably cheaper, probably faster, probably better in lots of different ways.
So a private cloud is kind of the concept that we're going to talk about today. What are the biggest challenges enterprise IT teams face today that VCF 9 as a solution to build those private clouds is specifically designed to solve?
Yeah, so look, if we look at where enterprises are, a lot of enterprises have been playing with public cloud for a long time, probably tried to put a lot of things into public cloud. And most enterprises I talk to have had public cloud first as their mantra, right? So we're going to put everything in the public cloud. It's all going to be there. And what that means is most of the medium to large enterprises I talk to have been almost staring at the public cloud so long that they've neglected their on-premises. Now, some of them might call what they've got on-premises a private cloud. It really isn't. It's typically some stuff with a bit of automation smeared across the top of it. If I'm honest with you. And realistically, most of the conversations I'm now having are people looking back at that on-prem stuff going, wow, okay, this is a bit of a mess. It's actually grown, despite me saying that everything was going to go to public cloud. Well, because stuff does grow no matter where it is. And so really the challenge that they're looking to face is, how do I solve this mess of on-prem stuff? What's my route forward for that on-prem stuff? And that's really what VCF 9 is specifically designed to solve. And I think the important thing about that is, and the big difference from previous versions of VCF, and we've had versions 3, 4, and 5 of VCF and so on and so forth, is that it really comes to meet customers where they are. So existing, the previous versions of VCF, and this one well, we go, oh, you want to build a VCF? Right, well, go buy some nice new shiny hardware and build a nice new brand new cloud. And everyone's like, sorry, build what? No, I've got this thing I need to sort out. VCF 9 is about taking what you already have in place, upgrading that and moving it forward to being a full private cloud. And I think that's probably one of the major things about VCF 9 above everything else. And there's a whole bunch more we can talk about.
Well, and you mentioned a couple of things that were already really interesting because, what we've seen for many years at customers by like building something, bolting something onto it, automating some parts, don't automate other parts, it becomes very complex. It becomes very costly. And because of all of the different ways you kind of manage it, you get an inconsistent operating model. So how does VCF 9 tackle all of those challenges?
So we looked at two personas, really. There's what I suppose we call the cloud admin, or the people running the cloud, the infrastructure folks. and then the consumer of that, the person who's taking those services. And we focused on how do we build the best possible experience for them. That's really where we came from in this, right? And so when you look at VCF 9, there's a phenomenal set of UI that then essentially is guiding people through everything they ever needed, which is what we've really brought together in this, all those previous products that they need to properly run or consume a private cloud, depending on their persona. So let's talk about the run one. In there, we're talking about, okay, fleet level management tools, things that enable you to manage huge amounts of infrastructure at massive scale. As you mentioned before, it's lots of bits cobbled together with automation and scripts. And a lot of the problems we see at people running any reasonable size thing is just the fact that they start to just things start to creak and crack, right? I've not quite got all the right tools to do this, and I've got to roll an update out, and how do I get that to push out to all the right servers at the right time in the right order and everything else? And how do I make sure I tick all my security? And how do I do config management? How do I control drift? And all these other bits and pieces that you spend your life as someone as an infrastructure management just spinning around, exploding. You think, must be a better way to do that. Well, the answer is there is a better way to do that. The public cloud operators have been doing it for years. It's how they do it, right? So essentially what you're looking at, what we're doing with VCF 9 is bringing all of that tooling to the private cloud environment. It can properly make it a private cloud as opposed to, as you quite rightly said, a bunch of stuff sort of, with some scripts on top.
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing that kind of stands out is also that there's a new operating model tied to it, right? So it's not just, here's the self-service portal, there's my end users, now consume something, or fill in the self-service portal, you get a workload, and we'll see how you manage it. So there's a whole new operating model around that as well, right?
So look, I have a saying, I'm going to, when I retire eventually one day, I'm going to write a book, and it's going to be called Bagley's Law. And it's that any conversation about technology, if it's left to run long enough, will end up being about people and process. And we've managed to get 5 or 6 minutes into this before we've done that. So you've done well, right? Okay. And it's true. And it's because every conversation I have with customers, it always comes up with, well, we can't, you present phenomenal technology to them, like the world's best private cloud platform. And they go, yeah, but that won't work for us. And you're like, right, okay, let's understand the reason why it won't work for you. It's people and process. There's no technology reason why this isn't going to work for you. It's because you've got particular things in place, i.e. organizational structures, skill sets, processes, procedures that need to change to take advantage of this. And what really upsets me most, actually, Johan, is when I see people who've gone to the public cloud, when a public cloud provider turns up and says, here's our interface, you use us like this, ask no questions. They're like, okay, yes, whatever you say, that's exactly what we'll do, right? And they change their people and process to use the public cloud. In many cases, actually, some people don't, and that's where they fail in public cloud, right? Is they don't actually change how they do things. But most people are like, oh yeah, we'll do everything you say, mighty hyperscaler, because that's how we're going to work and use you. Yet when we turn up and go, actually, we really think the best way to run your private cloud is like this, everyone goes, no, we know better about how to do on-prem, and we know better about how to do our stuff. And it's like, no, actually, really, you are going to need to change your people and process to think like a cloud provider, to think multi-skill. There's a really good example, which is Broadcom themselves. So when Broadcom acquired VMware, they were quite a mix of what was going on in terms of internal IT, using various technologies, including, competitors of ours. And of course, we brought the whole VMware IT with us as well, which was a big thing that had, I'd like to say, a lightly evolved mess is the right way to put it. And the evolution that went through in turning to being a proper private cloud provider and adopting VCF, and now being an early adopter quite clearly of VCF 9. The story alone, the figures will blow you away, right? So they went from 42 to 7 data centers. This is what Broadcom did. This is in 14, 15 months. We started with acquisition, and this is where we are now, right? So 42 to 7 data centers, 2,500 to 68 employees running the private cloud.
Wow.
Right? 45,000 to 15,000 hosts. As they went through that dramatic simplification, if you speak to Alan, who's our CIO, he'll tell you those 68 people, none of them are single skills. He doesn't have network people. He doesn't have storage people. He's like network people that also do storage, or compute people that also do networking, or cloud management people that are also experts in networking, and so on and so on and so forth. He's like, none of those 68 are just someone who's good at one thing, right? It's all about that blended mix. So they think about delivering a platform, they think about delivering a service. And they now do that to 27 individual businesses at Broadcom, which are very separate, legally separate in some cases for various reasons to do with non-compete and other things. So they work as a service provider to 27 very demanding users that together make the 8th largest company in the world. It can be done if you've got the right will, a strong, hard Scotsman at the top, which is what we have with Alan, telling you how this thing does, backed up by a CEO who knows what he wants, right? And then you can get it to happen. You really can go through this dramatic transformation. But you're right, it has to be that change of people and process. And every customer I go to, they always tell me they're unique. Like every bank tells me they're different. Every pharmaceutical company tells me they're different. Every defense organization, you go, oh, we're very special because we're defense. I'm like, no, you're not. You're the same as every other defense customer I go to. And we know how to deal with them. And to be fair, your needs aren't much different, and I think that's where people need to get over.
So this might be kind of a rhetorical question, because you mentioned already a couple of different industries, and the type of industries you mentioned are relatively, big. Is there any kind of sweet spot customer or a typical customer where you think that this could really shine, or is it, a solution that is suitable for nearly every company? What's your take on that?
Of course, I'm going to say it's a solution for everyone, for nearly every company, right? Of course, I'm going to say that. But in reality, it is. I can't think of any particular one that's not suitable for it. I can't think of anyone that, we need to. One of the great things is that I can walk around, look at my high street, look at my internet and see all these brand names, and they're all VCF customers. They're all VMware customers, right? 87% of our top 10,000 customers have already re-signed with VCF. So that everyone has the need for some form of private cloud. Okay, you might find there's there's the very bottom end of the market, the really, really small, the tiny enterprise that maybe had 5 servers before. And maybe they can put whatever they needed to do up in the public cloud and then everything else can be done with SaaS. That's fine, right? I get that. That's cool. But anyone from a reasonable size that has a need to run their own IT services and their own IT infrastructure, VCF is going to be suitable in some form or other. And, it's also within a large enterprise or within our medium-sized enterprises, or any customers really, we have different sizes of VCF running too. So you've got the full, VCF running in the data center, but we also push right out to the edge with VCF Edge and smaller, right? So that operating model works anywhere, and even in the public cloud with all our, public cloud offerings of VCF2 across, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google, and others too.
So VCF 9 came with it's a whole new release. It's let's kind of zoom in to the technical standpoint. You're the CTO, so
I've got TA
should be loving talking about technology. So what are the key innovations in how VCF 9 works compared to the previous versions?
So you're going to go in there. There's some really cool features like NVMe tiering. So we got the ability, clearly, paging to disk is how we used to call it in the 90s, right? But NVMe memory tiering. There's a whole host of stuff we're doing around switching and networking. And if you go across the board, there's a whole list of tiny little things that, not tiny, lots and lots of different things that make big steps forwards. And so I think they all come together in, making it a much better product. But I think rather than focusing on any one of those individual things, memory tiering, for example, or whatever, actually probably one of the things that for me is the biggest change is that operations focus. And I think that operations and automation piece is probably the most important thing. And it's the number one feedback we're getting from customers that have been looking at VCF 9 is that ease of use, that way that instead of focusing on all the cool new features and all the cool new technical stuff, what we did was that next layer up is what we used to call, VROps or ARIA operations and vRealize, all those kind of things, and there's now VCF operations, VTF automation. All of that comes together into a coherent platform that is specifically designed around the use cases that we're looking at. And there's a bunch more stuff coming in there too, like multi-tenancy. Remember the old VCD that we've known for years? And Lab Manager, for those of us who remember it, really old, right? That will be coming in as well. So we have multi-tenant built in too. So we're not going to take VCD and bolt it in, by the way. We're going to build all the features that you need in VCD into VCF. And so realistically, it's actually more about the coherency of the platform and how we focused on making it easy to install. The whole way that you install it now, the whole way you manage it has changed. A bunch of things have gone, like enhanced link mode, for example. A bunch of other bits have gone, but there's better ways to do that now in VCF 9. And I sat with our CTAB last week in Brussels, which is sort of, the top technical representatives from some of our key customers sit on our technical advisory board with our product teams. And a lot of them were going through kind of, this is what we're deprecating, but this is what we're replacing it with. And there was never a case of went, oh no, that's going to be a major problem for us. It was like, oh right, I get that. That's going to be really cool. That's a much better way of doing it. Or that's a nice way, and that's going to be easier, and so on and so forth. And again, we've had a couple of programs. We had the early adopters. So we had some very early adopters starting beginning of this year, and some really large accounts, big banks, etc. Some of our most challenging environments were early adopters, and they have been using the technology since then, and we've had some really good feedback on that. Then we had a beta program that launched, not long after that, where we've had hundreds of customers installing it. So we've had a really good, solid testing of this, and we've had some great feedback from those people while we're doing it. But across the board, it's just been, this is so much better in terms of easy to use, more coherent. It's talking to me as an admin in what I need to do, and I think that's really important.
I really love that you started the answer that there's a massive focus on automation and operations. And I think one of the perfect examples where that really stands out is private AI. Broadcom has been, from my perspective, a leading company when it comes to private AI, especially now when all the geopolitics are, impacting how customers are consuming and deploying AI applications.
Yeah.
It's a very hot topic, and VMware has made some bold moves here. So how does VCF act as the foundation for private AI deployments, especially for organizations that want to keep data private, compliant, and under control?
Yeah, so look, when we first started, we've supported machine learning workloads on the hypervisor and on our platform for a very, very long time. We've run some of the largest HPC clusters in the world been running on VMware, including Copenhagen and those over here in Europe that we've got long experience with. So when the hype of LLMs came out, we weren't suddenly caught, wow, okay, where did that come from? We were already doing a lot of work. We'd already been working with NVIDIA, a whole bunch of other things. And in fact, myself and a couple of others in the then office of the CTO at VMware had been out doing some research, a specific research project, talking to our largest customers about their concerns and understandings about LLMs early on and what they thought they were going to do in the marketplace. And there were some interesting use cases came back that were really cool, that caught some people unawares that people weren't thinking of, that are actually mainstream now. A lot of them were like, we can use this to look at all our old code and work out what the hell it does and rewrite it better. That's kind of, look at this old COBOL stuff, rewrite it in Python for me, right? That kind of thing. Whereas the overwhelming concern was data privacy, data control, that exactly as you talked about. So it became clear to us that though LLMs were going to bring a new workload type to our platform, which we had to be ready for, and it was clear that partnering with NVIDIA initially, we also now partner with AMD and Intel and others, but partnering with the leader in that space to make sure that we provided the best services in that space to people wanting to come to use our platform for AI purposes. But then making sure that we help them to do that on-prem to meet the reasons why they want to do it on-prem, which is around, cost and privacy. And costs are a really important one too, right? And I think this is important to understand. A lot of the reason why people sort of are looking to repatriate from public cloud already with their traditional enterprise workloads is cost. They've met cost requirements. We did some research recently with a public cloud survey where 94% of the people surveyed believe some of their cloud spend was wasted. And over nearly half of those, I think 48%, believe that waste exceeded 25%. So I think people are already scared of the fact that going to public cloud, probably with LLMs, is going to maybe waste money or cost money. So they're looking at how do we do it on-prem efficiently. So that was one of the things. The other thing that was really interesting was we had some of the early adopters who were going out and buying huge clusters of GPUs, big, huge clusters of H100s and all this other kind of stuff, that were then coming to us and going, we've got a bit of a problem. Essentially what we've done is we've built a bunch of physical silos. Those silos are underutilized. We're finding it difficult to make sure that we've got the right people accessing them at the right time. So we need some role-based access control. We need the ability to move workloads around between them. We need the ability to do sizing and costing. And I'm kind of like, this is sounding very familiar to about 25 years ago when people said that about x86 servers, and we had this solution called virtualization, and hey, let me help you. And so actually a lot of the early users of private AI were those that were coming to us for just the classic use case around, can you put some software on top of this, a layer on top of this that just makes it optimized, more cost effective, easy to use, role-based, secure, and so on and so forth. So actually when we go out and talk to customers now about why they want to use private AI, it's because Yeah, I mean, look, not a lot of people are going to do their own on-prem training of models, right, from cold. It's not going to happen. But what most people are doing is they're taking public models, they're bringing them on-prem, and they're executing them. Either they're doing fine-tuning for them, they're doing RAG augmentation, or they're just using them for inference. In that case, we want to make sure that we provide them an environment that is secure and safe, but also has the ability for them to do all that cost management, role-based access control, and optimize the usage of these very expensive resources they're in. And that just goes towards what we're seeing as very much a sort of a very mixed bag in terms of what's going to be in the data center. You know, if you'd gone back 10 years, someone would have said, oh, it's mainly going to be x86. x86 is one, possibly a bit of ARMs coming along. Cool, do you guys have an ARM hypervisor? Whereas now we talk about the concept of an XPU, where you've got various different types of processor. I mean, we call some of them GPUs. I don't know why still, because none of them do graphics anymore, right? But we talk about the context of these XPUs, where you've got TPUs and various other different things and data process units and stuff. So we need to make sure that going forward, VCF 9 onwards is understanding if someone's going to have this very broad mix of resources. And we're going to have to make sure that the very broad mix of modern workloads are going to come to those and they run the right place, the right time. Last thing, typically we tend to see that we can get workloads running on-prem about a half to a third of the cost of running that same private AI workload in the public cloud. And as a really good example, we provide coding Copilot support for over 1,000 developers within our R&D on one H100.
Wow.
So, you know, if you get these things, you size them right, you bring them back on-prem, they can be secure, they can be fast, they can be cost-effective, and they can be running on your own data. It's phenomenal, right? So that need is there. And VCF 9 has everything you need to do that and more.
What I really like about that story is that it kind of offers you the hyperscaler-like experience, but for your private cloud. And I still remember that you presented the keynote at the Dutch UserCon, the Dutch VMware UserCon in 2015, where you talked about white box servers in kind of the software-defined data center of the future. That vision felt bold at the time, but seeing it fully realized in VCF 9 today, how does that feel? And what lessons have you learned from the journey?
Look, I feel really happy about it. Let's put it that way. I feel like, you know, a lot of people said to me, you know, why did you stay at Broadcom? Because a lot of other people left Broadcom, right? You know, a lot of people, you know, I could have left and gone off and, you know, done other things, retired or whatever. But for me, there was a vision that I was kind of brought on board to be part of. And I'm not going to claim, you know, I invented it or anything. I've just been part of the team going forward. When I came on back in 2011, we had this whole concept that actually, you know, Raghu termed in a meeting that a bunch of us were at a radio in Monterey in 2011, which was in, you know, our internal R&D conference, where we came up with the term software-defined data center. You know, and if you look back, that's when it kind of appears in 2011. If you look back at Google Trends, etc., was we started talking about the software-defined data center back then, because there was talk about software-defined networking and storage and stuff. And we said, well, how about a whole data center, which was kind of like what, you know, Google were doing back in that day and other cloud operators were doing. And Google in particular were racking up laptops, in essence. And they were racking up laptops with DC power supplies. They were building a shared file system across them. Sound familiar, right? And we were like, okay, well, can we do that? But we do that for the massive, because, you know, Google was doing it for a particular use case in their data centers. And it's all very, when the strong guardrails around use case and app, it's quite easy to do something like that because it's fairly homogenous. But we were going to a heterogeneous world of customers with thousands of apps and thousands of servers. You don't do that overnight. It takes some time. So over that time, we've done some phenomenal things at VMware that I've been part of, you know, such as essentially creating HCI, hyperconverged infrastructure, as a concept, right? Bringing that out, Project Marvin and everything that came off with that, VxRails and all the bits, and whole spin-off companies that have popped up since, right, based on that. The concept of vSAN with Christos Karamanlis, who's a phenomenally bright guy who invented that, actually was my supervisor at Imperial College when I was doing my degree, which is really weird, and another story for another day. Lovely chap who invented vSAN and sort of brought that forward, and then obviously bringing in Nicira. So we brought together all of these pieces to create this world, but spent all this time fighting our own internal politics and customers, people, and process that we've talked about already, to the point where actually getting private cloud to reality was quite hard. So if you fast forward to 2023, and when, you know, VMware was being acquired by Broadcom, we were about, I suppose, 9, maybe 13 different business units within VMware. The office of the CTO, honestly with you, was kind of like a layer that sat across all of those, but didn't really ever get to dictate. We sort of set strategy and waved our hands about where we think things should be going. It was more of like I suppose, like a religious and lobbying organization than it was necessarily any kind of command and control in that respect. Because the BUs all had their own way of going. So, like had the ESX guys were sort of, the core hypervisor. This was our roadmap. This is where we're going. And then alongside it was vSAN kind of going over here. And then orthogonal over here about 90 degrees was NSX, and possibly was sometimes a bit of their own cult as to what they were doing in networking, all competing against slightly different things, all heading in slightly different directions, right? But all building amazing stuff. And in fact, some of the problems we had at VMware at the time, I always used to say to people, it's like, no one's doing the wrong thing. They just might not be doing it in the same direction as you. They're all doing great stuff. And we then sort of brought this thing called VCF across the top of it, right? Frankly, it was always a bit after the fact. It was like we get the three components and some other bits and pieces, and we try and create VCF on top of that. And it always lagged the ESX, it lagged NSX, it lagged the releases of the underlying components, and very much they led the roadmap, not VCF. It was very much being led by them. And so that's why VCF was what it was like. And when we brought out a new version of the hypervisors, you'd be coming to us going, when can we upgrade VCF? And you go, about 6 months, probably, I think, I don't know. What's the VCF roadmap like? Not really sure, because it's kind of a derivative of a derivative of a derivative. Totally different. You want one word to talk about Broadcom? Focus. Simple. It's the best way I can put it. Focus. And so the focus was very clear from the start, from conversations we had, pre-acquisition when we were going through the due diligence with Hock and his team and everything else, that VCF was very much, going to be it. And VCF was where our key value was as an organization. And so what we did was we flipped the org. So we brought all those BUs into one. It's the VCF BU. The lead product is VCF. Everything else, hypervisor, storage, networking, everything else is all children of that. They're all derivatives of the VCF roadmap. And so much as you now, as someone who deploys stuff, as I know you do, Johan, in anger, it's now very nice that everything in VCF 9 has the same version number. So it's not like, oh, you're running this. Well, in which case you've got ESX version 8 or whatever, and NSX version, right now it's okay, fine, that's simple. But more importantly, from a product perspective, VCF is what we sell. VCF is what we deliver, and VCF is where we're going with that. So for me, I now finally feel like we've delivered. So it's like, why did I stay? Because I saw what we were doing with the org. I saw what we were doing in VCF. I saw the plans around VCF 9, chatting to Paul Turner and Chris and everyone else internally. I was like, we're going to finally do it. We're going to ship like a private cloud platform finally. And it's going to be what we sell. It's not going to be after the fact. And it's going to be the same one that we sell to service providers. And there's not going to be a different version for Dell. And there's not going to be it's going to be this one version that truly can do what I pitched in that day was you can be buying different servers every week and it doesn't matter. And that was really my point back then, was it should be that we have a big flat layer 2 network and all the magic happens in software. We have a bunch of x86 servers with some storage attached to them, however fast you want it to be and what you can afford. And this week I'm buying boxes from this company, and the next week I'm buying boxes from that company, and so on and so forth. And I don't care what they are, because the magic all happens in the software. And I can automatically, and then I won't go through the whole presentation with you, but it's the whole sort of left thing, and the applications become wholly independent of the underlying infrastructure. So my number one most important applications are always running on the stuff that I bought this week, right? So I put new servers in, put new fast servers in, fantastic. Automatically, all my most important stuff shifts over and is running on the latest, coolest hardware. And then over time, my less and less important stuff is running on the stuff I bought 4 years ago or whatever, and it's all shifting across. That was the vision. Now, finally, with VCF 9, we're going to do that. And now the next bit for me is all these advanced services. So you talked about private AI. There's a whole bunch of other advanced services like Data Services Manager. Well, yes, we're going to finally have data services that sit on top of a cloud, MySQL, SQL Server, Postgres, etc., all there as a service, all integrated with that cloud platform. So, in short, I'm not going to claim I was a visionary, but I feel like I've been banging a drum for a very long time that finally we're going to get out, And I sat in front of the press last week talking about this VCF 9 launch and the private cloud study, and someone said, oh, so you're now saying the future's hybrid? And I'm like, I've been saying hybrid for 15 years. But for 15 years, you've all been telling me, oh, of course you'd say that because you're from VMware or Broadcom or whatever. Sorry, I could rant about this for hours here. But, truly, it's a really passionate thing for me. And you're right, it's something that I love, and I just feel like we've got that.
Awesome. I think it's I love this story, Joe. It's an honor to have you here to talk about that, because you and I mentioned this to you earlier before. I think I even said it to you in person, that was kind of the presentation that inspired me to become a public speaker as well, because the whole combination of not just inspiration, but also the vision and something that felt so far away from what I was doing that day at customers, but still totally made sense. Yeah, I think that I remember like very vividly. So yeah, thanks for explaining that. Still, I want to kind of go through a couple of aspects of VCF 9 as well, because you mentioned different types of data, like services that you can run on top of that. But one topic we haven't talked about yet across the board is security. Yeah. And it's more important than ever. So what improvements in VCF 9 help organizations strengthen security, and especially in regulated industries or when using AI in sensitive workloads?
So there's a few things. I mean, obviously you've got the distributed firewall features that are in VCF anyway, and some of that sort of east-west traffic control stuff, but that comes under the brand of what we call vDefend, which is this additional services we talked about. I think that those advanced services, the vDefend piece, what we're doing in there in terms of automation and intelligence is probably the most telling thing. So if you go in there and look at the demos that are about there in there about the threat intelligence stuff that's working with you all the time as like I hate to use the some sort of AI chatbot buddy, co-pilot, or whatever, but we're building that in there for you. And probably in a world of security, that's probably the most important place you need to have this kind of assistant, right? Because no one can keep up with all the types of threats that are going on in there. No one can understand everything, right? Even the best CISO can try and, CISSP can try and pretend they know what's going on, but they don't. So having that huge threat protection database being constantly updated and looking at what you're doing in real time is really important. But I think also, let's come back to that automation piece and the operations piece, right? Most security flaws come from complexity and diversity. They come from the fact that I've got multiple different systems doing different things, and I forget that I've got to do this one slightly differently to that one and this piece and that piece, and when I need to come up and harden my approach or do whatever it is, so on and so forth. The more I can start to automate those things, the more I can start to have config management and drift management running in real time to make sure that any of those situations where I could have security loopholes come up, the better. And then even right down to the basic stuff that we now have in place live patching for the hypervisor. I mean, that's cool as hell, right? That was something that I remember seeing launched at Radio, our internal R&D conference, years ago. Someone going, well, imagine if we could like live patch a host whilst it was running. And you'd be like, whoa, that's cool. Of course, my father, who worked in mainframes for years, was like, yeah, IPL, get over yourself. But this is cool stuff, right? This is like, yeah, we can do that. But for us in our platform, the ability to do that. So I think it's not just about one particular feature like vDefend this or whatever. Again, it's about bringing together that automated approach to running a private cloud platform as a cloud operator and thinking about automating things at scale and managing things at scale. So you'll keep hearing us talk about fleet management as a term. And I think a lot of people, when they hear fleet management, are like, what's that? I don't know. And it's just very simply managing a lot of stuff in a very easy way. And so, from a security perspective, that's really, I don't know. I'll ask you a question. What do you think?
Well, and I'm going to go back to what you mentioned in that 2015 keynote. In one of your slides, you talked about cat versus pedal. Pets versus kettle.
Chickens versus kittens. I have my version. And so the founder of that actually was cats versus pet. We were both involved in Cloud Camp at the time, and I was doing chickens and kittens, but I think I'll give it to him with pets and cattle. He was first.
Yeah, but I think this is it. This is exactly it. We're going to move away from managing infrastructure. We're going to go away from doing a lot of things by hand, which kind of still is the thing. And I think one of the things that I don't know, we had a conversation about this, but last year I had a conversation at Explore with an employee of Broadcom, and we talked about, for instance, a challenge we saw at customers that vSAN was not performing well, and it was mostly due to the fact that that was not a configuration issue, but the customer had changed certain aspects of, for instance, HBAs or of the network. They were really tweaking stuff themselves. As a result, databases weren't performing anymore, applications were not performing anymore. And what I really like about where we are today is that I don't have to. So I have a workload. I'm going to run the workload on the private cloud, and the underlying infrastructure will make sure it's going to run. And I think that's just a really important aspect of the cloud operating model as well.
That's a good point I want to land, and it's a conversation I had. So the CIO of a very, very large customer of ours sat with me a while back and said, oh, we've always been build versus buy here. You know, we either build something ourselves or we buy it. And I said, no, you don't. You build versus buy, then rip apart and rebuild and mess about with. It's like, what do you mean? I said, well, you never bought something and just run it the way the vendor tells you how to do it. What you do is you go and buy something and go, well, actually, for us, we need to tweak this thing like this. And I think I know better how to do your product, though I'm going to tweak that thing like that and blah, 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 blah. And I said, so actually, that's why when I come to you and say, I'm going to upgrade the new version of VCF every 9 months, and you look at me going, we'll never be able to upgrade our systems every 9 months. Well, of course you won't, because you've ripped them apart and messed them about so much that you're never going to meet that schedule. But if you'd left them as they were, they'd upgrade fine. And I think it really is that it's that mentality of, can you just listen to how we best know to do this? I was a bit arrogant at one point and said, look, we spend more in R&D on VCF platform alone now than you do in your entire IT budget for the year. So who do you think is going to be better at building and running a private cloud? Probably us. And we're bringing to you in that platform all the learnings of every other customer running stuff at massive scale, to your point. So it is quite often when people go, oh, it doesn't work, this isn't very good. It's like, well, yeah, because you've tweaked that bit. At the extreme, the words I hate to hear when people talk about private cloud is best of breed, because it makes me, oh, God. It's like someone saying, oh, I'm going to go and build my own car. It's going to be fantastic. I'm going to have an engine from Ferrari, and I'm going to have the gearbox out of a Mercedes, and the wheels I'm going to get, because those BMW wheels I really, really like, but the braking, you're like, fantastic. I'm sure it's going to be lovely. It'll drive horribly. It'll cost you a fortune to maintain, and then you can't turn up to any of the original dealers, go into Ferrari and say, fix my car. They go, well, none of this is mine apart from that bit. So, but that's what we see enterprises do all the time, right? And they then have these teams of, highly trained mechanics that are very expensive trying to maintain this best of breed car they've built. And it just doesn't make sense. And if I go back to that very first example I talked about with, Google building their data centers and going software defined, I've always likened sort of Google's as like an F1 team, right? And any of those hyperscalers, they're like F1 teams. They can afford the best engineers in the world because they're doing stuff at the cutting edge, at the highest speeds, at the biggest scales and everything else. So that's what they do, right? But what they're building is not suitable for us to use every day. I've got to go and build out there with VCF 9, sort of like the Tesla of cars for you, that literally is off the shelf, just works, very simple, repeatable, cost effective, blah, 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 et cetera, et cetera. That's what I've got to go and do. And so that's the real mentality to get customers have got to get into as well. Unless you're an F1 team, you aren't, then go and buy yourself a bunch of Teslas or whatever, name another car, right? BMW, whatever you want to call it, right? Off Broadcom, and just drive them.
Yeah, I really like that metaphor. That really shows what a perfect example of Tesla is take lifecycle management as an example. They just update your software on the go, and you have pretty much a whole new car. So are there any examples at customers that you already seen using VCF 9 where they reduced cost or had faster operations or had easier lifecycle management?
So, I mean, no one's actually deployed VCF 9 live in production yet, because it's just gone GA last Tuesday. So I can't really say, yes, I've got 37 different customers all using it at scale. I've got early adopters that have played with it. I've got ourselves in Broadcom that can talk about it. And we're going to have a bunch more of those talking at Explore. So we're putting those together now to sort of put that together. But yeah, anecdotally, I mean, the examples I gave earlier from the internal Broadcom case study are enough. But in generally, yeah, it's just people are, realizing that if they sit down and think and run like a private cloud operator, the benefits are all there.
So we'll definitely leave a link to the Explore registration in the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing that really kind of
well, don't forget about Explore on tour as well. So there's another thing.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, right. So we have Explore going on in Vegas. which is in August. But then we have 3 Explore on tours going on in Europe for me, which is we have London in September, we have Paris in October, and then Frankfurt in November. And those are, smaller events. They're going to be, the highlights, best of, with labs and certification, all the other kind of stuff you'd expect. Sorry, small advert.
No worries, no worries. We'll leave show notes or links to in the show notes to all of these events.
Great.
Pretty sure that ITQ will be part of every single one of them. So looking at the practical side of things, one of the things that you mentioned earlier is that we don't really care what your current estate is. We'll be able to simply move you over to VCF 9. So what does the upgrade path look like from the previous version to version 9? And how easy is it to get started with a greenfield VCF deployment?
So greenfield VCF deployment is the easy one, right? That is actually the easy one. And you don't need an awful lot of hardware to get going with that. In fact, you'll see we're going to demo us doing that on a very small amount of hardware very soon. William Lamb, who's famous for building, huge infrastructure on small things, is going to demo something quite impressive to show you how small you can actually run VCF 9 going forwards. But yeah, if you're a customer, then a greenfield deployment of VCF 9 obviously is the easiest path because you're starting afresh. The one that we've made easy and we've made simple is upgrading from previous versions, which didn't exist before. So the ability to put your arms around existing installations. Anyone out there who's thinking about, okay, we're maybe not going to get to VCF 9 in 2025, we might look at it in 2026. Fine, but what I'd ask you to do now is get to 5.2. And so, the easiest thing to do is to go out there, look at your existing installations and get VCF up to VCF 5.2 if you can. Whatever derivative carries on after that, because it is literally an in-place upgrade from 5.2. And that's one thing that, Johan was like wide-eyed, like, no, really? I'm like, yeah, seriously, that was huge to me. When I joined VMware in 2011, I came from another company, Quest Software. And there were a few things that I was crusading about as coming from the outside in. But one of the things that I was crusading about was based on the deployments I'd seen elsewhere. Was that our R&D at the time had this idea. It was just typical developers that sit in a little box and just write their own stuff, right? They just thought, well, so how do you deploy this? Oh, well, the customer just needs to build a whole new environment and migrate to it. Was this whole mentality, right? And I went round in 2011, 2012, 2013, writing upgrade, not migrate on every whiteboard I could see in Palo Alto and every other R&D place I went to. And one of this campaign. And again, I'm so happy now because VCF 9 is finally people have listened in R&D and been told that, what we call brownfield ingestion or in-place upgrade or whatever you want to call it, that's a thing. So now it is an upgrade. And people ask me, what's the upgrade going to be like from 9 to 10? Well, it'll be an upgrade. That's what it'll be. It won't be, it won't be the big thing. So because you can't be a cloud operator and have the mentality that you have to build a whole new cloud and migrate to it. It just doesn't happen. You build a highly functioning, very important, mission-critical private cloud. That thing has to be able to upgrade itself. And not big hit either. You can't do it where, actually what you got to do is just have one day when you down everything and upgrade your control plane to X. No, it's got to be able to do it in piecemeal. It's got to be able to do it. And that sort of, evergreen is another term that we're hearing a lot now in the industry has suddenly become a cool thing to do. But that evergreen mentality is really important. So yeah, you want to go play with VCF 9? There's online labs. There's a whole bunch of different things you can do. You can go and play with. You can deploy it yourself now, and there is on very simple amount of hardware that you need to do it relatively. But also, if you've got an existing installation, I encourage you to get that roadmap and that path to 5.2 as soon as possible, and we'll get you there from there. It should be an upgrade. Easy.
Awesome. Talking about roadmaps and looking a little bit ahead, you mentioned Explore and Explore on Tour already. So is there already a little bit of a peek that you could share around what's in store for VCF?
No, we'll save that.
Then we'll definitely invite you back on the show whenever a new release is being announced. Now, one final question before I let you go. If there's one message that you want IT leaders to take away from this conversation about VCF 9, what would it be?
You could just rewind and play the last 42 minutes, I think. No, let's think about this. Put it into one message, in one sentence. There's a few points, but let's go with it. I think realistically, you've got to change your people and process to think about operating as a true private cloud operator. That's the big step. Understand that you're going to have to go through a process of simplification and standardization. And that simplification and standardization will turn you into a private cloud operator. It will turn your people and processes into a private cloud operator. And from that, you will get benefits around efficiency, cost, speed, and all the other different bits and pieces. VCF 9 is the thing that is going to take you out of that complex, messed up world you've got of all the bits and pieces and various 7 different versions of private cloud and private cloud.next and private cloud don't know this is the next one, private cloud, this is the best one that everyone come down and go to, and turn that into one coherent environment that provides you with that true platform. And a platform for everything. Platform for both your traditional apps, but more importantly, for modern applications. We've managed to do a whole this time without mentioning Kubernetes, Johan, which is amazing. Right? But with Kubernetes built in for every modern application you can think of, including private AI, the sky's the limit.
Awesome. Well, Joe, thanks so much for being a guest. Looking forward hearing and seeing more of you at Explore and Explore Tour. So for you, if you have any questions or feedback or want to follow up on VCF 9, drop us an email at podcast@itq.eu or visit our website, itq.eu, to know more about VCF 9. For now, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.